Two guys, Mickey and Bobby, the son of a mafia boss Howard Saint, turn up to an abandoned shipping yard to take care of an arms deal. They meet with an arms dealer by the name of Otto Krieg, who comes down to check out Bobby and to take a look at the cash. His employers, the Russian mafia, join them to confirm the deal, but suddenly, FBI agents surround the shipping yard in numbers. Otto pulls his weapon and ends up getting shot to death. Bobby starts to freak out, and in the confusion, he is shot and killed, much to Mickey's shock. Otto is confirmed dead and carried in an ambulance to another location, but he turns out to be not dead, as this was all a ruse and he is an undercover FBI agent by the name of Frank Castle. He regrets that anyone had to die, but as they got the mission done, he calls it a day. It is Frank's last day in the agency, and his colleagues throw him a surprise party to celebrate his retirement. They congratulate him as being their best agent they have ever known, and he leaves soon after. We then see men pull up to Howard Saint's mansion and break the news to him and his wife about the death of their son. They bail Mickey out of jail and he is picked up by two gangsters. They drag him before Howard, beating him and telling him to apologize for the death of Bobby. Mickey tries to explain that Bobby demanded to be in on the deal, but they do not care. He tells them about the man Otto Krieg who brokered the deal, but adds that he is dead. Howard does not care and wants his revenge on the man who was to be taking care of his son. He takes a gun from one of his guards, but instead of shooting Mickey he shoots Bobby's bodyguard. The man tries to explain, but Howard just shoots him dead before storming out. Frank returns home to his wife Maria, who is relieved to finally have Frank to herself. He goes out back to reassure his son that they will not have to move again, as he is home for good this time. Howard goes to the morgue to view his son's body, accompanied by FBI agent Jimmy. He demands to know who is Otto Krieg, but Jimmy refuses to give him details, telling him to leave it to the professionals, to which he agrees. Howard orders his men to learn everything they can about Krieg, and acquires access by bribing corrupt federal law enforcement officers for his federal service history. After the funeral for Bobby, Howard learns that Otto Krieg is really Frank Castle and he is vacationing with his family in Puerto Rico. Howard's wife then grimly tells his best friend Quentin to ensure that they wipe out his entire family. In Puerto Rico, Frank's entire family is gathered, and his dad is proud to have his son home. They drink and have a good time, with Frank and Maria heading off down the beach to spend some alone time. The next day, Frank is talking with his wife about having another child. His son gives him a t-shirt he bought at the thrift store, which supposedly wards off evil spirits. Frank opens it to see a black shirt with a skull on it and tells him he loves it. The large family meets up by the beach, but unknown to them, heavily armed men are making their way to the resort. Frank and his dad are checking out his gun collection, when there is a gunshot. Suddenly, shots begin to ring out as the family comes under attack, trying to flee but being picked off one by one. Frank and his dad grab weapons, and he manages to blast one man away. Maria and her son are hiding on the beach, as Frank and his dad engage and kill a few of the men. They then rush to the beach where they see everyone dead. Frank Sr. is shot and Frank battles the man. Maria and their son spot a van nearby and decide to run towards it, but Howard's men spot them and give chase. Frank sees them and manages to fight off his attacker before jumping on a bike and racing to save his family. Maria is trying her best to stay ahead of the men who begin to fire on the Jeep and trying to run them off the road. Finally, the men manage to blow out a tire, causing the van to flip and crash. Maria crawls out injured and grabs her son, screaming for anyone to help them. They spot Frank Sr.'s boat and race towards it, but the men drive them down and run them over. Frank gets to the docks, and is shocked to see his wife and son laying lifeless on the ground. He holds them in tears before seeing the men driving straight towards him. He opens fire on them, but Frank is shot in the arm and leg and lay bleeding. The men drag him to his feet and Bobby's twin brother John begins to beat him down. They drag Frank to the edge of the docks and shoot him, before covering him in gasoline and setting the docks on fire. There is an explosion and Frank is sent flying into the water. Frank is not dead though and drags himself out of the water, passing out on the beach. He is rescued by a local fisherman named Candelaria. Howard and his wife are celebrating their revenge with Quentin and John. Howard has to talk business, so he sends Quentin to dance with Olivia. Despite the men talking to him, his focus is on his wife and his best friend who seem strangely close. After 5 months in Puerto Rico, John is on his way to full recovery. Determined to avenge his family, Frank gathers all his father's weapons and heads out where he spots the shirt his son gifted to him. He thanks Candelaria, who tells him to go with God, but Frank tells him God is going to sit this one out. He gets back to New York and moves into an abandoned apartment where he begins to prepare weapons, and booby traps the entire building. He buys himself a 1960 Pontiac and modifies the engine and the car to be bulletproof. His neighbors, 3 outcasts, Joan Bumpo and Spacker Dave, are all intrigued by Frank, wondering what he does for a living. They want to ask him but they are scared. Mickey is getting off work when Frank kidnaps him and takes him back to his apartment in chains. He threatens to kill Mickey if he doesn't tell him about Howard, but Mickey does not know how dangerous Frank now is, until he lights a torch next to him. Frank goes behind him and tricks him, holding the torch to a piece of steak then touching his back with a cold popsicle, causing his brain to think he is being burnt. He begins to scream in pain, causing the neighbors to get scared and run back to their rooms. Mickey then begins to spill like a dropped soda, telling Frank about Howard's money laundering business. Frank then releases Mickey, who is shocked to see he is not burnt. He reveals that he hates Howard and his family and decides to help Frank out, telling him about Howard's wife, who is the real mastermind. Frank begins to track and take photos of Howard, John and Quentin, who is revealed to be into guys. Frank then rips the headstone from his grave and drops it on Howard's golf course, indicating that he is back. Frank then appears to Jimmy and the police chief, demanding to know why no one was brought to justice for the slaying of his family, but due to Howard's influence they are unable to pursue the killers. Frank then breaks into Howard's money stores, knocking out a few guys before ordering the men to gather all the cash. He then cuts the glass open and tells the men to dump the cash out the window. Outside, people are in a frenzy as cash literally rains from the sky. Frank steps out and is confronted by two men and there is a tense standoff, before Frank swiftly kills both men. Frank returns to his apartment, where he is consumed by thoughts of his family and drinking his sorrows away. Howard is meeting with Quentin and John, wondering how Frank is still alive. He is then visited by two mafia brothers whose money Frank threw out the window, amounting to $50 million. They demand their money back from Howard before leaving. At the apartment, Joan has locked herself inside her room as her crazy boyfriend bangs on the door. Bump and Spacker try to step in for their friend, so the boyfriend begins to smack Spacker up, until Frank intervenes. Frank socks him in the face and chases him out. Joan comes out, thanking him for saving her and apologizing about his family. Frank then tracks Olivia down, plants a fire hydrant beside her car, before stealing her car. He calls Quentin using a voice changer and threatens to expose his sussy pictures to Howard, unless he meets him at a hotel with $5,000. Frank then parks Olivia's car in a handicapped spot at the hotel, causing her to get a ticket. He waits until he sees Quentin turn up at the hotel before driving Olivia's car back to its original spot. Howard is asking for Quentin's whereabouts when Mickey reveals that he saw Quentin at a hotel. Howard hears Quentin and Olivia laughing and asks where he was. Quentin lies that he was here all along and that Mickey probably made a mistake. Frank is at a diner where Joan works, with Bumpo and Spacker there with her. A man walks in, takes a seat and begins to stare Frank down. The man whips out a guitar and begins to sing a song, telling Frank that he wrote it for him and he will sing it at his funeral. Frank is waiting by a bascule bridge when a car suddenly rams him from behind. The man from the diner jumps out and opens fire on Frank, who pulls down the shutters to protect himself. He manages to escape the gunfire, but almost hits a girl and crashes. The man catches up to him as Frank crawls out of his car and is ready to end him, but Frank fires a ballistic knife into his neck, killing him. That night, John is overseeing a shipment of cash for Howard when he hears a ticking sound on the boat. To his surprise, it is a claymore and manages to dive from the boat before it explodes. Howard gets the news about the explosion and orders Quentin to take care of it, and to bring in the Russian. Frank is at home when there is a knock on his door. It is Spacker, asking for his help with Joan's boyfriend, who is back. Frank rushes in, but the friends have tricked him and prepared dinner for him. Frank eats up hungrily and they all go around saying what they are thankful for, and Frank just says thanks for dinner. Spacker and Bumpo excuse themselves and Frank and Joan spend some time alone. She tells him that good memories can save his life and tries to kiss him, but Frank turns her down and leaves. He heads back to his apartment and is having a drink when there is another knock. He opens the door, but a large man dressed like Waldo begins to attack him. Frank stabs him, but he tanks it and forces Frank to stab himself. The massive man begins to throw Frank around with ease. Frank tries using a grenade but gets it thrown back at him, causing a massive explosion. He continues to attack Frank, who is fighting for his life and getting nowhere. Frank pulls his gun, but the man just flattens it and throws him through the walls and into Joan's apartment. Frank manages to throw a boiling pot of water into his face before tackling him over the staircase, killing him. The three friends drag Frank back to his apartment, where they get him some alcohol and stitch him up. Spacker then sees John, Quentin and two men turn up outside. They hide Frank just as the men enter the apartment to see just Spacker and Bumpo there. Quentin demands to know where Castle is, but the friends refuse to talk, so Quentin takes a seat in front of Spacker and begins to question him, which now seems sus since we know what Quentin is into. Spacker still refuses to talk, so Quentin begins to yank out his piercings, but they soon leave, still not knowing anything. Howard gets the news about the dead Russian and orders John to get all his men, as they are going hunting. Castle, who had been hiding in the elevator shaft, comes up and stealthily kills the man left there to keep an eye on him. He sees Spacker bloodied and in pain, wondering why he would sacrifice himself for him, but Spacker tells him that he is family. Frank then begins to gather his weapons, with Joan trying to talk him out of it, but his mind is made up and he sets out. Olivia is out once more when Frank breaks into her car and steals her diamond earrings, before calling Quentin and raising the price to 10 grand for his sussy pictures. He then calls Mickey to put his plan into motion. Mickey shows Howard the ticket Olivia's car received, which indicates that she was at the hotel at the same time that Quentin was there, making Howard suspicious. He heads over to Quentin's apartment where he sees Olivia's diamond earrings on his bed. Quentin returns home, shocked to see Howard there waiting for him. Howard confronts Quentin about sleeping with his wife and out of anger, he attacks and stabs his best friend to death, ignoring his pleas to stop. Olivia returns home to see Howard trashing the place. He accuses her of sleeping with his best friend and she tries to tell him that Quentin was into guys, but he ignores her. He then drives her back to the first place that he met her. He drags her to an overpass consumed by anger and throws her onto the train tracks where she is killed. Howard gets back to the office where he has gathered a group of killers to hunt for Frank. John comes to ask about Quentin and his mother, but learns that Quentin is wrapped up in something and his mother took the train. Meanwhile, Frank is out in the woods, getting his weapons ready, saying how Frank has died with his family and he is now the Punisher, donning a vest with a white skull. The first guard is killed by an arrow. He then plants bombs under the cars before breaking into the home. He kills another guard and wires explosives to the door before continuing on. Upstairs, a man radios down ordering champagne to be sent up in the lift. Frank sends up the drink, but attached to it is a claymore which blows up the room. He then begins to kill the men in the room, barely missing Howard, who escapes in a lift. Frank takes 2 shotgun blasts to the vest, before killing his attacker. Howard and another guard are heading to the door when the bomb goes off, killing the guard. Frank finds John trapped under debris and makes him hold an anti-personnel mine in his hand and leaves him there. He corners Howard as he is trying to escape. Outside, they hear John scream and explode, before Frank shoots Howard. He taunts, however, that he made him kill his best friend and his wife, before strapping his feet to the back of a car, and strapping a bomb to the back and sending him driving slowly through the exploding cars, causing him to burn to death. Frank returns home having taken his revenge and now prepared to take his own life, but he sees a vision of his wife and changes his mind. As he is leaving, he leaves Joan and the guys a gift, telling her that he has work to do. Spacker gets released from the hospital and they go searching in Frank's apartment to find a cupboard filled with cash for each of them. The movie ends with Frank standing on a bridge, warning all wrongdoers that the Punisher will be coming for them. Remember to turn on notifications, so you can watch more movie recaps like this. Thanks for watching.